Good evening and welcome to Basic Income Backbone for the Arts, a discussion looking at how those working in the arts would benefit from a basic income. My name is Maggie Gordon-Walker. I was a professional performer in London for many years. I'm now director of the community arts charity Livestock that I co-founded in Brighton. Before we start, I'd just like to run through a few bits of housekeeping. We'll keep everyone on mute while members of the panel are speaking, and we'll take questions for discussion afterwards. Please put these in the chat box with an uppercase Q at the beginning so they can be seen by our moderators. We'll be posting other information in there too, including links to useful organisations, people on the panel, and how to get involved with the basic income movement where you are. To save time, I won't give detailed introductions for each speaker. Instead, short bios will be put up in the chat, and you can explore their work via the links to their websites later. This discussion will not be about the mechanics of basic income. If you're interested in trials, stats and theories, information about these will be in the chat box. But a brief description for those unfamiliar with it is as follows. It's an income paid to individuals as a right of legal residence, without means testing or requirements to work. The payment is non-taxable and should be sufficient to cover basic needs. Having a basic income in place would provide a secure floor for people to build on, rather than a benefit safety net with holes so big that many fall through. Facing an increasing social crisis of austerity, climate breakdown, and the COVID pandemic, a livable income paid without condition to every individual is a key part of transforming our society for all. It's a global human right. We all deserve the means to live. So what's the relevance of basic income to the arts in particular? The arts are an essential part of our lives, yet this country does not support those that work in them. At the mention of financial backing, mutterings of elitism start to emerge, as if the arts were just for and about those enjoying Wagner or the Royal Ballet in Covent Garden, rather than providing all of the music, film, theatre, TV, art and literature that we all enjoy and are nurtured by. Not to mention arts projects within the community, which have provided real empowerment to many people or turned around the lives of those that are disadvantaged. Basic income would not only support those working in the arts, it would support those who enjoy them, i.e. everyone, by giving them the cash to go to gigs, exhibitions, theatre, and so on. A colleague of mine said, in response to Rishi Sunak's suggestion that artists retrain or get another job, I will continue to do what I have done throughout my career, which is to make meaningful art with people in places hidden from view. Sunak's comments seem particularly short-sighted when you realise the arts sector generates over 23 billion for the economy and employs 370,000 people, versus, say, the fishing industry, which generates just under 1.4 billion a year, employs 24,000 people. Yet the fishing industry is seen as more viable to the Chancellor, as are arts venues, some of which have recently received a bailout, rather than those that make art in them. The call for basic income has been getting louder. The Musicians' Union had a campaign calling for it back in July. Many arts professionals, such as Brian Eno, have credited the unemployment benefit that existed in the 70s as providing an essential support to begin their careers. This now seems like a long-lost luxury for which the country will be all the poorer. Eno says he went on the dole because he was afraid that any kind of job would make it impossible for him to pursue his music career properly. He argues that basic income will increase creativity, giving the message that all people are potentially creative and they should be given the chance to express that. Indeed, music in the UK would be very different if the dole had not existed. Bands such as Roxy Music, The Clash, or indeed UB40, who took their name from the card that you had to produce when signing on, were formed by people who wanted the chance to create without scratching around furiously, wondering where the next meal was coming from. The UK is particularly ill-served in how it treats those working in the arts, regarding them as eccentric layabouts. Yet it is not the same everywhere. My father, when he moved to France, was told as a writer he should become a member of excuse my pronunciation here, Entraide de Travailleurs Intellectuels, which granted him some benefits. Apparently, when it came to the health system, as a registered intellectual, he would be on the same level as a farm worker. I've always admired the egalitarianism of the French system. In Ireland, artists are permitted 1 year on unemployment benefit without having to look for work, to allow them time to pursue their practice, rehearse, or develop a portfolio. The UK used to have such a system, enterprise allowance, but this was axed a long time ago. Without these schemes, it is only those from privileged or moneyed backgrounds who have the luxury of a career in the arts. Sadly, it is frequently assumed that artists are not worthy of being paid anything at all, the claim being that they benefit from exposure. Yes, I'll have my exposure fried with egg and chips, please. So now let's introduce and talk to our panel. Welcome to Graeme Farrow, Sarah Lee, Bernadette Russell, Martina Laird, Simeon Miller, and Toby Lloyd. I'm going to speak to each of our panelists in turn about the work they do and how money has played a role in their careers. Whether there are jobs they have either taken or not taken due to money. Has there been pressure from employers or families or friends to justify their choice of career as a proper job? The role they think the arts plays and who the arts are for. Then we'll have a more general discussion and answer questions. So, Sarah, we're coming to you first. Sarah Lee is Artistic Director of the Irene Taylor Trust, which runs creative music programs with those in the criminal justice system. So, Sarah, you started your career really in the community making music. Was that a deliberate choice for you?
To make music in the community?
Yeah.
Oh, God, absolutely. It was all I really ever wanted to do. And after starting working in the Scrubs, I realised that there was a huge amount of work to do for people who have skills but are actually hidden from the world.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Irene Taylor Trust, where you currently are, what the nature of the work is and the benefits it has for people?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to be coming from the perspective of two groups here. Firstly, the freelance musicians who form the core of our organisation's work, and also the participants we work with in prison and also the community. So the organisation creates music with people who probably thought they couldn't do anything like that. Projects are run by professional musicians who work with groups of vulnerable people to keep them creative and inspired. Many people we meet in prison and the community have often not had any major chances in life. So the projects we deliver are often the first time they've succeeded at something. Helping people write their own music with the help of professional musicians is an extraordinary experience, and often we hear a life-changing one. So the benefits of the work are numerous. I mean, firstly, the world is treated to a plentiful supply of great new music. For us, it keeps a brilliant group of freelance musicians in work, allows them to share skills and gives them an income to supplement their other freelance work. It keeps vulnerable prison engaged in positive activity, and people's eyes are opened by the fact young people and prisoners are creative beings, which ultimately makes them more cohesive societies. As people understand there are reasons why crimes are committed and that communities can and should effectively support those who have had tough journeys. It shows that the arts are for everyone, no matter your background or the path you've been on in life. So we think that creating arts is uplifting. It gives people a focus, it's confidence building, inspirational, satisfying, all things that give everybody a sense of worth, which is very likely to spill over into other areas of their life. This is, of course, applicable to us all, whether we've had the breaks in life or not. Even without reading countless studies, it's clear that poverty and crime often go hand in hand. The choice is usually to try and find legal, but quite limited sources of income, should any be available, or to take part in criminal activity. Poverty influences crime rates because at its core, it highlights and reinforces the differences between those who have and those who don't have. For those released from prison, you still have the same responsibilities for rent, food, and your family, but it's often extremely hard to find work with a criminal record, which is the thing which might allow you to take responsibility for those things. If you need money to survive and you can't get it in legal ways, you may be likely to look for other ways to get it. It can be extremely hard to break the cycle for a number of reasons, but the majority of people don't want much. They just want to be able to live and support their families. Having a basic income as an artist would undoubtedly take some of the anxiety away. So Irene Taylor Trust feels strongly that whoever you are, you should receive decent remuneration, because you're providing an extremely skilled service and your time. It shows you are respected and it allows you to live, and it means the arts is seen as a proper job. A basic income for all would ensure that art was given space to be created without the pressure of worrying how you were going to get through the next week. I think all of us here probably know that the arts is regularly seen as a hobby and met with puzzled looks when you get asked to be paid for your art form. For as many years as I can remember, artists have been apologetic when asking for a fee, feeling they have to justify it. I've never understood why countless years of learning and honing your craft as an artist is not acknowledged in the same way as any other profession. You wouldn't question a solicitor, an accountant, or a plumber, yet people do question artists. The arts would appear to be seen as an add-on, a nice to have, or a garnish to life, which for me as an artist makes me pretty furious. A UBI benefit for both groups we work with would respect them and their art and give them space to continue to make it whilst knowing they could still pay their bills. It may save people looking for additional work, because having to work a number of jobs to get by leaves absolutely no time, space, or energy to be creative. For former prisoners and young people, it may be the thing which keeps them from going back to prison and what they know. People rarely do crime for fun. It's usually because they need to live. I personally feel artists are artists, no matter how they arrived at that point. So we should be taking care of everyone, whether you come through university or Her Majesty's prison. The past 7 months has put all our freelance team and participants in an extremely precarious position. Instead of being supported to work on their art, they have been told by Rishi Sunak and his crew that they should retrain. Whilst they haven't done that, they have had to earn money in other ways, which takes them away from creating and honing their art. Having a UBI would undoubtedly have taken some of this appalling pressure off them.
Thank you, Sarah. You've answered pretty much all the questions I was going to ask you.
Okay, have a seat, Mag.
Quite a few of the people that work for the Irene Taylor Trust have actually been inside themselves. Am I right in saying that? Or
we have groups of people. Our project team, we supplement with people that we've been working with for a while, because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to support people to learn their art whilst learning from professionals. So we try and mix it up as much as we can.
And that must be a fabulous advocate for your service, that there's people who've been inside and now employed by you, and then that will be an inspiration to other people that they work with, I would imagine.
Yeah, it is. I think it's really important to do that, actually, Maggie, because it kind of breaks down all the barriers. And I think also the work that we do with young people, for example, if they see somebody potentially as old as I am going in and talking about the reasons that it's not good to go to jail, they could quite rightly look at me and say, well, how do you know? But if we have people with us who have experienced that, who are finding their way by doing something positive, and can have a conversation with these young people, knowing exactly the path that they've taken, it's such a massive help to the kind of support of the young people, because they do find out that it's not great going to jail. You lose everything when you go there. So it takes it away from being a bit of a cool badge of honour, to something where somebody who's experienced it can say, mate, it's not a good choice.
Yeah. And also, the kind of work that you do. I mean, I've similar thing, working with mums, and the mums that then take part in our groups, then lead groups. It's worthwhile work. It's not just, oh, you've been inside, all you're good for is shelf stacking. It's something that's creative and transformative for them and the people they're meeting, which I think is of great benefit to their mental health. It's got to be.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you, Sarah. We will be answering more questions, I'm sure, later. Let's turn now, though, to Simeon. Simeon Miller is a lighting and audio visual designer and QLab programmer. Simeon, please tell us about QLab programming, because I don't know what that is, and I would like to know.
Do not get me started on QLab, or that would take up the rest of this whole
talk. Oh, really?
talk.
Okay. Well, maybe just a 1 minute précis, or if you really don't want to, but it was in your bio. So. I've looked it up. I know it's something to do with computer light design, so that much I learned.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, QLab is probably a good thing for this chat anyway, because a large amount of the features it has are free if you're using them at a very basic level. Okay. It is something that anybody could download and produce something quite high quality for. So it's kind of in the same vein as all of this as well. that's kind of been my whole thing with this, is about trying to get access for everybody to all of the stuff that people use to create art, and it not being so exclusive in who can get hold of it. So it's actually not a bad, not a bad place to start.
Great. So can I tell you, so you're a younger member of our panel, if everyone else doesn't mind me saying that. So did that affect your choice as to, you know, what you went into? I'm thinking with training, because certainly when I was younger, training, you didn't have to pay fees, whereas I imagine you might have had to pay fees for your training. Did that affect you?
I would have done had I not been extremely lucky to get a scholarship from the Somerset House Foundation. So I grew up in Tottenham, and I mean, I would love to think it was because of my talent and potential, but I can't imagine there were many other people in Tottenham applying for that scholarship. So it was probably luck. But I think the fees that were present, I applied for a Dada when I went to drama school, but if I'd have gotten that, I still wouldn't have been able to afford to go. That would have covered most of it, but not all of it. So I've basically like blagged my way into the industry from the very beginning.
So how does it feel sort of starting, you know, you, as I say, you've been out working for maybe 10 years or so, is that? Yeah. How did it feel sort of starting out under these kind of conditions? Did you get pressure to have a more proper job from anyone, or was it a lot of support?
I think, again, I've been quite lucky in terms of my family and friends being very supportive in terms of what I've been doing. I think it was more actually a pressure I put on myself to try and reach the same level of stability and income that somebody would reach having a normal employed job in a field that was kind of valued. And I think that pressure kind of fell onto me. Nobody else needed to give it to me in the first place, because I still have all the same goals and ambitions that people have, but it's just harder to get.
Sure. And how do you think a basic income would benefit you?
Apart from having money, I think if we were still in an environment where it'd be an interesting thing to think about, maybe like 1 or 2 years ago, where the kind of work that if you're lucky, you get to choose what kind of work you're doing. And if you're not as lucky, the ability to like choose where to work and where not to work, and choose who to work for and who not to work for, are actually things which have a huge like knock-on effect. Like most of the people I know, the big stresses in their life are work, not liking where they're working, not liking who they're working with or working for. Those are the big things, apart from love and relationships and stuff. Those are the things that create the stress in people's lives. So I think having a bit more freedom in terms of making those decisions would have probably made almost all the decisions I've had to make over the last 10 years maybe slightly less on the side of what will make me the most money, rather than what would I want to do.
Okay, thank you, Simeon. You will come back soon. Martina, we'll turn to you next. Martina Laird is an actor, director and teacher who's known both for her theatre and TV work. So Martina, some people watching may recognise you from Casualty. I'm sure you have all the time. That's probably what you're most recognisable from. So in your very successful career, have there been many periods of unemployment or work you've had to take when you're not working as an actor?
Oh, they certainly have. Of course they have. I would say that, you know, all actors depend on casual employment at some point. I would also cover that in my youth, when I first started out, it was still the time where you could claim some kind of benefit. And it was seen broadly at the time that was the government's way of actually supporting the arts, is what it felt like. Obviously, that was not the intention. But all actors graduating from drama school, your first jobs are more often than not going to be low paid or fringe, or, you know, all this kind of stuff. We've lost the fringe in a way because we've lost that income benefit. So I, like like actors of my era, did have to sign on at certain points, but that meant that I was then able to be available to go to auditions, etc. I'm also lucky that I had parents who were able to bail me out, quite honestly. several times. If I had not had that, I don't know that I would still be able to do what I'm doing. So as much as that might be shameful or what have you, it means that I'm coming from a background where I was able to receive that support. And hence I'm still here. And like I said, I don't know that I would have been without it. So yeah, a basic income would definitely free actors and other artists to accept lower paid jobs, because the very nature of acting or being part of any kind of performance art or art form means that your employment outside of that needs to be casual and something that you can leave, which immediately makes it something low paid, which immediately creates this cycle of struggle. And it means that you are caught into this cycle of piecemeal employment, piecemeal employment within the industry, piecemeal employment to support yourself. Were actors able to receive a universal basic income, it would guarantee a much wider pool. It would mean that working class and single parents, etc., people with other considerations were not forced out the way that they are. That being the case means that we would have a fairer representation in the industry. So right now, we all know that there's lots of talk about, the industry being full of people who come from more affluent backgrounds. And we can see how this of necessity is the case, really. Were there to be a universal basic income, we could have a fairer representation, which I don't just see as a matter of fairness. I see that as quite an urgent social and political need. The fact that we do not have fair representation means that the voices and lenses through which we are seeing life reflected to us tell only one story. And that story is not familiar with a wide enough experience. So we are being given the lens under which the rest of the world is treated as stereotype, cliche, and this is dangerous. It fans the flames of society that we are seeing at the moment, because we are continually fed these false depictions of history, of society, and that has a very dangerous fallout.
That's brilliant. Yes, that's exactly it. The sort of, the one sort of face that we see, and that's just not representative at all. When you were in your periods of unemployment, how did you sort of manage to cope with that? Did you have any sort of strategies or way forward?
I have been lucky that I discovered teaching as well, which is where I am at the moment. These are not my cupboards.
Your cupboards have been more glamorous, I'm sure.
So I'm fortunate. And I say that I'm fortunate because I love it. That's what I mean, that I'm fortunate to have discovered teaching. I'm teaching acting, obviously. And the notion of having an alternative, which is something that you also love and that you also find rewarding, is a luxury. It's a privilege, quite honestly. And yet I still struggle to support myself in times of unemployment when these do stretch out. I would say also as an actress of color. This is of color. What color? Green. No, as a Black actress, this is a very real consideration. My peers and myself often have discussions about, you can imagine, would you take a certain kind of job? Would you take a job that represents Black people a certain way, or women a certain way? And the thing is that often we are forced into these jobs because of absolutely no income, or because we know that the way that the business is run, there will always be someone desperate enough to compromise their dignity and the dignity of those that they represent because they need the job. So again, we can see where not having that absolute safety net and basic level of dignity is, and I use the term deliberately, I find it dangerous. It allows for false representation and false depiction or inadequate depiction to be maintained, and therefore for lies to continue to be.
Did you have a preference, or has it affected your choices between TV and film, which pays more than theatre, or did that not affect you?
It's really interesting that you asked that, Maggie, because quite honestly, and again, I'm here being honest, laying it all there, but just before lockdown, so at the beginning of this year, I had reached a stage where I had to admit to myself, I've got to now turn down theatre work. I was getting a lot of theatre work, which I love. They're the best kind of parts offered to me as a Black actress. I love the dynamic of being in the rehearsal room, the exercise of the brain and the talent and everything that it is. But it was not sustaining me as a mature woman who wants to have a certain standard of living. I was able to work all year, 1 year, and still not have to worry about the level of tax that I had to pay. So that is telling you the level of pay that you get from working in the theatre. And I had just reached the point where I was agreeing with my agent, look, I love it, but we need to stop doing theatre. I can't be available to do but it is not getting me. It's not supporting me in a way that I could be supported and that I would want to be supported and that I deserve to be supported.
Absolutely, yeah. So for you, a basic income, would how much difference would that have made, do you think, to your practice?
It means that I would be able to continue to do the kind of work I like to do. At the moment, I'm overstretched at the moment because I have a problem saying no. So if somebody wants mentoring, I'm there. If somebody wants me to take part in their low budget production, I'm there. And I love doing all these things. And it's of benefit. I might flatter myself, but it's of benefit to people who are inviting me to participate, to have someone who has a lot of experience, who is willing to be part of their project. I'm now knowing I have to start saying no to people. Again, it's drawing me so thin that financially and emotionally that I can't afford to keep helping people.
Yeah, which is not a position that anyone wishes to be in. How is that helping a society where people have to make these kind of choices? It doesn't.
Well, that's not a way to live as a society. As a society, how much benefit is there to be able to participate in someone's growth, in something that's about community, that's something that the community can come see, that, but that's not going to pay me well. But it means that there are all these other people that are benefiting from me being able to give my time at a low rate.
Yeah.
And I say me generically, I'm not being...
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Martina. I'm sure there'll be some questions for you presently. I'm going to turn now to Graeme Farrow, who is Artistic Director of the Wales Millennium Centre and the International Festival of Voice. So, Graeme, you've had kind of a long progression to get to the Millennium Centre. Can you perhaps talk a little bit about that, your progression?
Winding back to what others have said, including Martina, and going back to what you said, Maggie, about Brian Eno. So I believe I'm sort of part of the last generation who benefited from the kind of Attlee post-war compacts. Right. So I went to a comprehensive school, I went to university, my fees were paid, I came out of university, was able to debt-free. I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do with my life. And at that point, I grew up in Sunderland. I'd never been in a theatre till I was like 21. And then I was able to go on the dole while I decided what I wanted to do. And I sort of knew that I wanted to have a creative career, but I just didn't really know how to do that. And I sort of volunteered. And then I worked part-time as an usher in this art house cinema because I was into films. And then gradually, it took ages. And then I was able to get, a house with my wife under the age of 30 and get on the property ladder, which is so difficult now for young people. And as Martina said, I also, had the benefit of, parents who occasionally would look after me when I didn't have work and unemployment benefit wasn't enough. So, you know, I was a freelancer for a few years. I was able to go back and get a grant to do an NVQ level 3 course in media production when I was 26 or 27. So all of these opportunities were available to me that I don't believe are there now. Young people starting their careers. But now that I'm sort of artistic director of a very large venue, I mean, I think the kind of ecology was fairly broken before we went into this. And one of the things that I'm seeing is just, you know, how easy it was for it to topple over. And, you know, the two kind of groups that were most affected were venues like the one I work in, which was heavily reliant on box office income and sells, you know, hundreds of thousands of tickets a year, and freelancers. And if you look at what strikes me about venues is that we don't employ enough artists. So artists aren't fully part of the ecology, and we need to actually bring that closer together so that we're actually reducing the fragility of what is at play here. And then, you know, there's been so much happening that's pointed out some of the issues that we've been discussing. So, for example, the kind of Desiree Kelly photograph, and I refuse to call her Fatima because that's not her name and it's deeply extractive to do that. But what was at play there was, you know, we value artists for the work they make, but we don't value them as workers who make a valuable contribution to our society. And I think that even sometimes as a venue, we would commission artists and employ artists to do the work as an outcome. What I'm more interested in now is looking at how we involve artists in how we do things, and how artists are actually part of the day-to-day running and the thought processes in Wales Millennium Centre, for example, because artists are really there for hire. And then what we see is the absolute precarity of being a freelance artist now, when venues aren't open, when there is no work. And I think that we need to look at, you know, where we can't guarantee jobs, how can we guarantee livelihoods? And how can we protect what Martina referred to as people's dignity? Because we've got thousands of people who are going to be joining the precariat now. The cliff edges we keep pushing them back, but come the end of fall, the next level of support, they'll cliff edge. So there needs to be an intervention which is not just about furloughing or a level of support. And I think now's the time to look seriously at income. And I think there's and you mentioned, you know, being a bit of a francophile there, Maggie. And I think what we're all caught up in, and I was a philosophy student, so Camus said that a society based on production can only ever be productive but not creative. And we've kind of got into this just cycle of valuing just being productive all the time in a sort of Protestant work ethic sense, which is kind of Victorian. It's similar to what, you know, when Ken Robinson took a scythe to the education system for being based on Victorian values of manufacturing and production lines, feels like the art sector's become like that, and we need to reset. And, you know, also give people that choice and that freedom to actually make decisions that benefit them without having to, because their lives are so precarious that they simply need to put food on the table and there isn't enough money to do that.
No, I think you're right. Yeah, what you say about the sort of drive for production. I mean, people would say that happens because governments are worried that if people aren't producing and they're creating, they might start to think, and they might start to think they don't like their governments.
Might be lazy.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'm also interested to hear about the City of the Unexpected that you mentioned. So the artists whose work you've brought to prominence and how they've been affected by funding and income.
I think it's desperate. I mean, Wales put £7 million into a freelance fund from the Cultural Recovery Fund, but then when you break that down, that I think we worked out there's 2,800 freelancers working in the creative sector in Wales, which would give each person less than £2,500 to live on between now and whenever the next level of support comes along. So we're just hearing, really, really bad, very, upsetting stories about people who don't have that support and who can't work and can't pay the bills. Now, if the government plans with where it's going at the minute, because I think they're planning even to end universal credit next April, the support for people who aren't in work will be at its lowest real-term rate since 1991 and 92, when I came out of college and I was able to claim unemployment benefit. And the wealth gap since I started working has increased dramatically in the UK. We have one of the biggest wealth gaps in Europe. I think in Western Europe, it's the biggest. So, I mean, there is just something in that system that is deeply unfair. And I believe that a UBI will go some way to addressing that. And it's, also it's not a hostile system. It doesn't involve the kind of Pauline in League of Gentlemen kind of job seekers type character who's actually kind of flagellating people for not having worked every week. And but the creative freedom that I believe it would give people and the ability to realize creative human potential, I think is one of, there's the poverty issue, but then there's a positive intervention into the creative lives of everyone in the UK.
Yeah, no, I was struck by this, the kind of arts being seen as niche when it's the entire fabric of everything we know and as part of us. And the way it's systematically being stripped out of any kind of curriculum on schools, I just find it absolutely appalling.
Absolutely. And
that's a whole other discussion, but anyway.
Curriculum's a whole other discussion. But I mean, I'd love to, one thing I was thinking about is if we all turned off art for a day, what would our lives look like? And during the pandemic, nobody would be Netflix and chilling.
I think that's got another meaning these days, but yes, I know what you mean.
And people, I think art has, I think Sarah said, has got, some people through this, and even people being able to find ways of being creative that they'd never explored before. And I think we have to kind of grab hold of some of that. And I think a UBI is just a way of protecting that creativity in everyone, not just professional artists, but everyone.
The actual Millennium Centre itself, have the staff been protected? Have you managed to be able to do that, or are they on furlough or what?
As many staff as we can. We've still got staff on furlough. We're awaiting the result of the recovery fund, and we have identified staff that we will keep after that, but we have made redundancies already, because we've no income and no prospect of any income until we think it might be summer, autumn of next year before our main theatre, which is 1,800 capacity, actually gets back on stream. And so in the meantime, we lost £20 million worth of income overnight.
Were you one of the organisations that benefited from this recent package or not? Or was that just for England?
We're finding out this week.
Oh, really? Well, fingers crossed.
All venues have been really forced into being more commercial and being less reliant on the state, right? And what we're all facing is a decade of cuts to the arts. Germany is not, I mean, Germany has its issues, but it's able to reopen theatres for limited audiences and so on, because it's not subject to, there is as much public subsidy to Berlin as there is in almost the whole of England.
Right, wow.
That's part of the problem.
So a basic income would have had a very beneficial effect for your organisation and the individuals working for you. Yeah.
Absolutely, but also particularly for freelancers.
Yeah.
Because the work isn't there at the minute, and so many freelancers have fallen through the cracks of support. I can't remember what the percentages were, but it was alarming. And it's just the whole ecology is too precarious.
Yeah.
I think it was precarious before this, and what the pandemic has shown us is that we need to address it, and there needs to be some kind of reset that I think a UBI will help towards. It's not the only solution. You know, we need to look at fair wages and employment and, you know, other things, but it removes that absolute precarity which many people face of being out of work and then not having an income which allows them to live basically.
Great, thank you very much, Graeme. I'm sure we'll hear from you later. I'm going to turn now to Bernadette Russell, who is an author, storyteller, kindness and hope campaigner, and theatre maker. So Bernadette, you've got a very comprehensive career.
Oh, such a long title. It's unnecessary.
So tell me about you and how your practice has evolved over the years and what drew you to the arts in the first place.
Amazing listening to everyone. I've had a lot of similar experiences, and I was thinking about this and I thought I had a lot to be thankful for. I was from a working class background, single mum. We were homeless when we were kids, but I had the advantage of being of the age when I got the dole when I left home at 16. I got free university, and I think it's really behoves us of this generation that benefit from that, as other people have said, to sell that story, to say, look, it wasn't much, because goodness, it wasn't much, because I was still, I mean, I'm not, I wasn't sort of sitting around on velvet cushions eating caviar, but I was able to at least make a start on my journey. So that's a really good story to tell, I think, in order to say we owe it to younger people that they can have this. But for me, and so I acknowledge that I was really, really lucky, even though it was and has continued to be a struggle. I still don't own my own home. I don't own a car. I don't even own a bike. But I have been lucky, and I've been able to do what I like for most of my life. There's a couple of things I want to mention. One is that I think we really need to address the elitism accusations. We've got an opportunity to address being accused of elitist now, and the coronavirus has given us an opportunity, because first and foremost, I don't think it's useful to separate ourselves and say we're artists and we serve the community. We're artists and you can come and buy us or see us, because what we saw during COVID, we all saw it, and some of us explored other art things ourselves, but that actually everyone's hungry to be creative. Being human is to be creative. Melvin Bragg talks about it in his brilliant talk. He did a talk called Of Our Times, which is about cave painting, unpacking this fact that as humans, ever since we began, we've expressed ourselves and been creative. People were covering their windows with art. They were doing macrame and embroidery and everything. So I think a way of sort of addressing the accusations of elitism is saying, this is all of us and all of you. This is an opportunity for all of us and all of you to be creative. That's what makes life beautiful and wholesome and hopeful, and this is what makes life good. And what we can do in the ecosystem of that is share our skills, So I think that's the thing that COVID gave us the opportunity to do. And maybe if we are accused of being elite, it's because we are, maybe we are. Maybe as venues, if we're saying we need to reach to hard to access communities, maybe they're not hard to access, maybe we are. So to be brave right now, not in a self-flagellating way, we're all doing our best, but just to say, what do we need to get people in? If they want bingo, give them bingo. You know, if they want pizza night, and to say they want it, like the Albany where I lived, did this brilliant initiative where they did a pizza night and they got everybody to vote on what they wanted. Let's do that. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. And those things can coexist alongside what we want to programme. So let's address elitism. Let's acknowledge the fact that to be human is to be creative. It's not a special thing. Some people, for example, I'll acknowledge Van Gogh, for example, is better at painting than me, but I can still paint. So I think we should.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good edict. Everyone can paint. Sometimes I look at modern art and yes, that is the kind of thinking I have around that.
So that's a thing that we can address really usefully, I think, to just say, look, it's important because it's important for all of us, and it's a beautiful thing that everyone's been able to discover. But also we need to really start encouraging ourselves and each other to think the best of each other. What we saw again during COVID was people, as well as craving to be creative, they craved to help each other. They craved to, you know, people were delivering food to each other and over helping at the NHS, had loads of volunteers. And I think what we saw then was the best of people, compassionate, community, connectivity. And that will help us as an arts sort of community as well, I think, because one of the things behind, you know, dole scroungers and we don't want universal income is this thing of some people are just going to sit around eating Pop-Tarts and watching Netflix. Well, that's up to them. If they want to do that, good luck to them, first of all. Secondly, let's think better of each other and let's encourage each other to think better of each other by sharing those stories. Actually, giving universal basic income, and there's loads and loads of examples of it. Sorry, I've got a really good example that I wrote down. Rutger Bregman, in his book Utopia for Realists, wrote about an experiment where 13 homeless people who it worked out had cost, by being homeless, had cost the state £30,000 a year, were given £3,000 each a year to live on. Most of them only spent 800 of that. One of them was a heroin dealer who became clean and did gardening lessons for the first time, went back to his family as a result of it. So we need to communicate these stories. Universal basic income dignifies people, and we are all good people. We're all, you know, we've seen all this. We're good, kind people that want to reach out and connect and be creative. So in order to sell the idea of universal basic income, we first have to sell the idea that people are good. The opposite of Nick Cave's song. He sings that people ain't no good, don't they? And I love Nick Cave, but I disagree there. I think people, they are good. And so it's really important we communicate that, because I think if people go, oh, do you know what, most people are all right then, we'll let them all have basic income. We need to persuade people, first of all, that we are all right, that human beings are all right. It's the first thing we need to do.
Because you do a lot of work within the community, don't you? You go out and create. Could you just tell us a little bit about some of those things that you do?
I do, yes. So I sort of worked in normal, you know, kind of regular theatre first of all, and then I started kind of working in the community kind of by accident, and sort of felt like just collaborating with various people that I live with, people in the library. I've worked with homeless people and refugees, but always it felt like a collaboration with those people rather than, you know, I am the great artist and I will visit upon these people. So that was really great, and it has taught me over the last 10 years, one, that people are good, two, that creativity is a fundamental part of being human, and that we need to get out there and get our hands dirty and be amongst each other and connect in order to sort of make things better. And the third thing I just want to talk about compassion, because I bang on about it a lot, but I think you can sell the idea of universal basic income as well as an act of compassion, of a fundamental act of compassion, from fellow human beings to other human beings. And at the moment you can buy t-shirts in New Look that say "Cool to be kind." So let's make the most of this moment when New Look is selling t-shirts which say "Cool to be kind," and say, yeah, it is cool to be kind. So let's demonstrate compassion to each other by just giving people enough money to have dignity, by giving people enough money to remove their fear and their insecurity. You know, I'm sure there are people here. I've been I've been hungry, I've had my shoes falling off my feet, and okay, I made certain choices to be an artist, but none of us want to be in a situation where the only people that can choose to be artists are already wealthy or are already secure, because otherwise we have one type of story from one type of person, and we need all of the stories, and I think we need it in order to survive. Not just the human stories, we need the other animal stories, we need the stories from nature, from the world, and to do that we need everybody.
Great.
Kind of went off piste a bit. But...
Well, no, it's good. It's a good rallying call, because you're right. Yeah, we've got to stand up and shout for that. Good. Well, we'll come back to you shortly. We're just going to go to our last person on the panel, which is Toby Lloyd, last but not least, who's currently undertaking a practice-based PhD in the Fine Art Department at Newcastle University. So, Toby, how would you define your arts practice, would you say?
Yeah, I guess the projects which I've been doing attempt to sort of create space for discussion. I guess a lot of the topics which people have been coming up with so far, and particularly what Bernadette was saying about, you know, how we sort of view other people, and how it's not necessarily how we view ourselves. And, you know, it's very easy to other people. And so the projects I've been doing have been trying to place, you know, it's not always about basic income, but basic income is a theme which keeps on coming up. And I'm particularly interested in, because I think, yeah, it does provide this, it would provide the resources, the time, the space and the security for more people to be creative. And I think, like Bernadette was saying, and I guess other people have echoed, is it, you know, it is a human thing to be creative. That's what makes us human. But yeah, so I mean, I'll give an example of one of the projects I've been doing, which is just in the chat there as well, which is great, which is called Between Eating and Sleeping. And it poses 3 questions. So the first one is, what did you want to be when you were growing up? What gets you out of bed in the morning? And what would you do if you had a year off? And I mean, the idea is that the questions are completely open to interpretation, but they place the reader in the past, the present, and a speculative future. And so once you've, I mean, the project works as I usually am set up in a space where I'm painting the questions onto the walls. So I'm just wearing overalls, so just like hopefully looking like any kind of laborer or worker. And it's usually in a public space, so people can just walk by and start talking to me and respond to the questions by writing the answers on post-it notes and sticking them up next to the questions. And yeah, like once I've had a conversation with someone, I'm able to sort of actually sort of place or talking to them about basic income in a way which relates to their own lived experience. And it's really interesting, just like the responses I get from people, like the responses to the first 2 questions. What did you want to be when you were growing up? Is usually things like space and dinosaurs and kind of the obvious kind of things. You know, and it's interesting just finding out how many people were able to fulfill those sort of things. And then also what you were saying earlier on, like why weren't you able to fulfill that? You know, was it because it was just a fantastical thing, or was it actually because there are structural inequalities in place which I'll let you get to that point? And then for what gets you out of bed in the morning, rarely people said work. It's usually things like my pets or my children, or pragmatic things like needing the toilet or needing food. But I mean, I like that question because it's a better one than what do you do, which is our normal question once you find out someone's name. You know, and I guess I'm lucky I can say I'm an artist, and that's not necessarily how I make money. You know, which is a good thing for me. I guess it's actually something about my identity. But the most interesting responses were always to what would you do if you had a year off? Because a lot of people were just like, well, what do you mean by that? That's, or you know, some were even, I can't even imagine that because life is so stressful. I'm just sort of conditioned to just working to the end of the day. I guess like what Graeme was saying about this, you know, Camus, like we're only, if society's only built on productivity, you can't sort of move beyond that. I guess that's like what Mark Fisher referred to as capitalist realism, where we can't imagine anything else other than this kind of treadmill we're all on. You know, some people said to me things like, you know, I'd like to have a year off from my family, or a year off from being me. Could I sort of imagine to be someone else, and things like that. And there was also, you know, some really unfortunate cases when people were saying, but I've actually had 3 years off because I got made redundant and I'm stuck in this situation where I can't move beyond that. But I guess like the whole point of the project is to kind of create a space where you can have a conversation with people, and and sort of actually find out, and for me also as the artist, to listen to other people's experiences and sort of beyond, move outside of my own experience and my own sort of bubble and all that kind of stuff. I place myself in a public space and engaging with people. But now once you've actually started to talk to someone about basic income, which can relate to their lived experience, you can move beyond the ideological barriers like it would make everyone lazy, or why should we give it to rich people? That's that whole thing which Redman says in his book, is that when you say, oh, it would make everyone lazy, and you say, oh, would you stop working and just sit on the couch and watch TV all day if you got basic income? And everyone says, no, of course not, I'd be productive. It's just everyone else. And actually, I mean, I know Barb Jacobson says, a great thing about, actually there are some people which we would like to stop working. What if Boris Johnson got basic income and just sat on the sofa all day? That's probably make it be.
Please do. Please sit on the sofa, Boris, not bother us anymore. Yeah. So you're part of the newly formed UBI Lab Arts. So perhaps you could tell us a bit about its aims and why you decided to get involved in that.
So, I mean, it's like UBI Lab Arts is quite a new group. It's one of the new labs as part of the UBI Lab network, which started maybe 3 or 4 years ago in Sheffield, and it started off as graphical, which would sort of raise awareness, advocate for basic income in their local area. And if anyone does want to join those groups, the labs have grown exponentially since COVID-19 happened. Because I guess obviously there's for all the obvious reasons why people are more interested in basic income. But it's also got several non-geographical labs. So there's now a UBI lab for looking at perspectives from youth, from women, for LGBTQ+ disability, and the newly formed arts lab. And as we are trying to represent everyone who has a creative discipline. So it's not just artists or musicians, it can be theatre makers, performers of any kind, craft people. But we also want to represent the views and opinions of people who work in arts institutions, whether that's galleries, museums, whether those are technicians, front of house, cleaners, administrators, for example, because without those people, these buildings can't function. And also, we sort of recognize that a lot of the people who are working in those institutions doing those roles, whether it's cleaners or public front of house or technicians, are quite often creative and artistic people anyway. And actually, they might have a creative practice which they have to supplement by doing working in one of these institutions. So we want to sort of be able to represent all of those people. We're also very aware that COVID-19 has created a double bind for all of these people because both sources of income have been taken away. I mean, it's that whole thing of Rishi Sunak's, you should retrain and do something else. All artists, actors, musicians, they all do something else anyway. None of them, very few people are able to live off their practice. So that's kind of what we're trying to sort of, highlight to a certain degree, but also, I guess it's like working with other unions and other forms of solidarity so you can actually create those networks. And again, it's that thing which I guess Bernadette was saying as well, that artists shouldn't be seen as special people. Everyone has the ability to be creative, and it would break down that elitism. And also the if more people were able to create and be creative, it would hopefully break down that elitism, but also hopefully start to address the inequalities which are in the art world at the moment. The art world is incredibly unequal, it doesn't have the diversity that it should have, and basic income, it wouldn't solve all those problems, but it would help to alleviate some of them, but it would also give people the opportunity to create their own culture as well and create their own art worlds. But going back to the arts lab at the moment, so we're still very new. We've only had 2 meetings so far, and we've decided that at the moment we're not going to be necessarily a propaganda machine for basic income, but we want to sort of critically analyze the policy because we're aware, some members of the lab are still unsure about basic income, especially if it would be introduced by the current government. And so, yeah, what we want to do is to use the lab to critically engage with the policy, but also use and make creative methods to open up discussions about basic income and communicate it to the public. So, kind of the projects which I've been doing as part of my PhD.
Great. Thank you, Toby. Right. We've heard from everyone on our lovely panel. We've had some questions coming in. So the first one is a kind of a little spiel, and then does the panel agree type thing. So I'll read it as best I can here. It's from Trevor McFarlane, who was on a call with Theatre Clwyd leaders. They are actually civil servants employed by the local authority. When the pandemic hit, not only were they ready to trial reopening, but they were also available when social services needed to reach out to give a family who'd been hit by tragedy some much needed comfort and space. I think funding local authorities properly is the way forward, giving artists a recognised role as worker, citizen and civil servant. If that devolved funding were distributed with artists, audience and leader panels, then the public would also get to see and understand that artists are workers and how poorly they are paid. Does the panel agree, and could this be a stepping stone towards UBI?
I'll just say, do you know what it made me think? Is maybe there's an issue with the word artist.
Okay.
Like, even I know that's probably a little bit controversial, but what I like about this, it has connotations and it kind of separates in a maybe not a very useful way. And some people don't know what it means. Like, someone's always asking me if I'll do a self-portrait, and I'm not really that sort of artist. So I think sort of maybe reframing it in a different way is really useful, just in response to one of the things you said. Being a civil servant, a creative civil servant, feels like a really good option. Yeah,
well, maybe this will be something for the UBI Lab Arts.
I'm kind of serious. I don't know what everyone else thinks about the word, but I think, all words, magic words, as the saying goes, and I'm not sure whether that, maybe it doesn't help.
In response to Trevor's comment, I agree that with most of that, but the idea of paying an artist UBI for something in return, I think lets people off the hook to a degree. So, I think it's important, UBI doesn't expect anything in return, does it? So it's not a contract for work. And that's where the freedom in it lies. And I think we have to be also mindful that, we don't make artists into social workers. So there's just a slight caveat to that. But I think as a step in the right direction, I think what Trevor outlined is a bold move. But UBI, if it's going to be universal, it needs to be universal.
Yeah, just to echo what Graeme was saying there, really, and I think one of the things I forgot to say with the UBI Lab Arts is that we would campaign for basic income to be universal, not just for artists, because again, we don't think we should be singled out as special people. Like, everyone should receive the same support. And for me, I see UBI as a way of investing in society. And as a way of rewarding all the unpaid labour which already happens, which society needs for it to function. But with that said, again, it's what Graeme was saying, but we shouldn't see it as a contract. And it's the same way that basic income would give support to, for example, all of the unpaid work which is predominantly done by women doing domestic work and childcare and caring for elders. That shouldn't be seen as a wage for all that work, because then that would, there shouldn't be a sort of transactional kind of a way of expressing it. Like, basic income is there to give support to everyone. It's not wages for housework, and it's not wages for artwork.
Thank you. Good question here from Jonathan. Why should David Hockney get a basic income? Not sure why it's opposed to David Hockney per se. Simeon, tell us about that, please.
I think I've heard a lot of people talk about this, like people with money getting UBI. And I think my point is always that they're already getting money under the current system. They're already getting money they don't deserve now. So it's not really a criticism of UBI, it's just a criticism of reality. And I think that I would much rather people who need money get it, as well as David Hockney, than just David Hockney getting money.
Yeah.
I think it's fairly simple.
It's, obviously inclusivity is far easier to manage than exclusivity. That's why our benefit system, the amount spent on checking benefit fraud is greater than that in tax fraud. It just takes so long trying to assess. It's just easier. Give it to everyone, tax it back from the rich. Far simpler. Question here particularly for Graeme. Does he think a basic income would increase community involvement, and how?
I mean, I would tend to think yes, because of the kind of freedom element and how it may, I think I view it as a creative intervention in society as a whole and not just the arts. So I think there's evidence that people want to be creative. I mean, one of the things that I'm in favor of is participatory budgeting, actually, which actually gives the power of the decision making about how money is spent in the arts sometimes to communities and allows them to decide for themselves, like Bernadette's example of, you know, if you want to have a bingo night, then there could be a way of deciding that among communities. So it actually devolves power from people like me to communities to make those decisions for themselves. So I think that's one way of addressing it. I mean, I don't know, other people like Toby might have done the research on it, but I would like to think that it would increase opportunities for communities to participate in the arts.
Yeah, I think you're right. Annie asks, is a basic income really a way of protecting businesses and not workers?
I'm self-employed, so it helps me as an individual and me as a business. So, and I think there's probably lots of people who are in that same situation.
Yeah. No, okay, I think you're right. Question from Marcus: is there a danger if the state pays and art a basic income that their artistic freedom is compromised and they won't be able to hold the state to account?
In answer to this question about the states paying basic income and therefore controlling it, that is already what exists, is that by the state funding arts councils, the state is then having to lay out the criteria by which art is judged and therefore rewarded with funding. And art itself it's impossible to judge the merit of art. Therefore, the laying out of criteria already means that somebody is setting an agenda which needs to be met. And the funneling of this money through certain specific bodies means that that body must be pleased. And you ask anybody applying for grants, they know that there's a certain talk they need to talk, there's a certain and content they need to include. They are already pandering to prescribed notions of worthiness and where the money goes. So actually, it would be freeing us of that.
Yeah. No, it's a very good point. Yeah. Thank you.
I think what I was going to say, Maggie, on the other point as well, is that part of the thing is about communities and things like that was the question, I think. And it's like, we have to decide whether we believe in art or not. And that's all that's all that it is. And then after that, we can go, well, how do we perpetuate this? How do we keep this going? So what is the role of art? And art was, we talk about the Renaissance as being where we kind of create a lot of our sensibilities as Western culture and things like that. The Renaissance is called the rebirth for a reason. It's coming out of the Dark Ages. Come out of the Dark Ages with art and science and thought. Moves beyond mere survival. They are able to reach a point of leisure. Yeah. And in that leisure, what we then remember of those civilizations throughout time, whether they are ancient African civilizations, Greek, what have you, is the art and the science and the thoughts that came out of those periods. What happened under COVID was a sort of a strange creation of that leisure in a society that is still at a level of survival. So we suddenly were afforded leisure. It's not leisure, it's not relaxing, but what it meant was that people were able to turn inwards. Well, they had to turn inwards. And what happened was that people then turned to creativity. And they found all new forms of streaming and sharing this. And that was clearly an indication of mental health and survival instinctively turning to art. Art itself also means that we deal in concepts, as does science, as does thought. It's about the creation of concepts through which we then analyze our world and we understand our place as human beings. That those concepts must then be communicated so that we can all join in with this analysis. By denying art to communities and to sections of our society, it means that they are not involved in the conceptual discussion of who we are and how we relate to life and to the world. And by the fact that we are denying them this access to their own definition is also robbing people of dignity, of meaning, of agency, and all the rest of it. So when we talk about, is art valuable in communities? Of course it is. It's beyond valuable. It's urgent. And as you're saying, what we don't want, and as governments that control people, is people to sit around and suddenly have deep thoughts about themselves and about their place in the world, because maybe they'll wake up. And that is what art is. It's concepts, it's the sharing, it's the communicating, and how do we as people relate to our culture? And if ever there was a time that we needed culture and the connection that that gives, it's now that we are separate and distanced from each other.
Great. You make a great public speaker, Martina, I must say. It's a question here from David. Is there a danger basic income would be a sticking plaster for poor wages in the arts? Sarah, do you want to comment on this?
I don't know. I just think, you know, I was just listening to what Martina was saying, and something else came into my mind which wasn't to do with that. Then, you know, once again, if somebody else wants to come in on that, but I was thinking about it's the way we describe all these things, and the fact that it is for everybody and should be for everybody, but we not us. People call it outreach work, and that immediately divides. You know, said, oh, what can we come and do with you? We'll do, and there's a huge great thing to, you know, to work out how to describe people, whether we're described as artists or creatives or whatever, the people we work with and how we work with them. It's a very important linguistic thing to sort out, I think. But, you know, whether or not having a basic income would continue to mean artists weren't paid very well. I mean, they couldn't be paid any worse, really, I don't think, at the moment.
Yeah. Yes. Simeon.
The only thing I wanted to point out was that sticking plasters are what you put on wounds until they're healed. So I think it would be fine if they were a sticking plaster for low wages, if they then allow people to create and influence the new arts industry that allows for better pay. I think that would be fine, and I think there wouldn't be anything wrong with it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Wound, very true. I've got a question here specifically for Toby. Do you see universal basic income more as a collective or individual process / catalyst?
I guess it could go both ways, and it depends on how it's implemented. But in terms of the collective aspect of it, I mean, I think that it would provide a leveling kind of process. It would enable more people to participate. I mean, at the moment where society's built on competition, and I think UBI would enable more collaboration. And I think that's one of the main problems under neoliberalism at the moment, is we're always chasing the money, or always chasing the thing which will enable us to pay the bills, which means that you end up producing lots of shit art, isn't it? Because you're doing stuff which you think is going to sell. And I think it always just reminds me of a comment which David Cameron made when he was Prime Minister about the British film industry. And he said, well, if the film industry in Britain could just focus on more projects like the Full Monty, which made loads of money, and the director of Full Monty pointed out that, that was, a total fringe kind of film. It was just a lucky success. And like, they didn't even think it was going to get finished at one point.
Really?
So, but the fact is, if you are just focusing on, that's why I've got, I don't know. I mean, for me, yes, I think basic income would enable more collaboration, enable more people to participate, whether that's culturally or politically. It would, just like Martina was saying, it would just give us more time to challenge what's going on at the moment. We wouldn't be worried about work as much, and in terms of the subsidizing low wages and all that kind of stuff, basic income would provide people with the security, the financial security to say no, whether it's exploitative work, whether it's exploitative relationships. and that would enable more collaboration. So yeah, I mean, I know that a lot of people say, oh, paying it to individuals, that just produces more capitalism and neoliberalism, all this kind of, I mean, that's, we already have that. Like, it would enable a shift away from it. But yeah, there is a danger that it could be badly implemented and undercut things. But I think on the whole, UBI would allow for more collaboration.
Thank you. Well, someone else asked here, a universal basic income or universal basic services? Another stepping stone. Simeon, go for it.
Yeah, I would love to get to UBS eventually. I think for all of the same reasons we were talking about UBI. I do, however, think that ideologically asking like the British state to pay people who are not working is already a big enough of an ideological leap. To pay people for nothing apart from that. So I think that stepping stone is probably the right word to use, and that we have to overcome a very core part of our nature, which is that there's no such thing as a free lunch, even though the people that run the country are eating free lunches day after day after day after day. So I think there's something that needs to be overcome in like the national psyche before we even get close to saying that everybody deserves to have the things you need to live without producing something that can be sold to somebody else. That's like such an ideological leap for us, I think. We need to get to UBI before UBS became... The minute we get UBI, Toby, I'm telling you now, I'm leaving UBI Lab Arts and I'm joining UBS Lab Arts, and then the whole thing starts again.
Yeah, for those that listening in who may not, so that's universal basic services. So, the idea that everything like education should be free, I think. Yeah, Toby and Simeon probably know more about that than me. Again, there's probably a link in the chat that you can look up on that if you want to know more about it. Martina.
I do believe in UBS, but I do think that there's a difference with UBI and about the independence and like I said, agency that it affords beyond even the artist experience. I remember listening to someone political. I was in New York, and it was the Women's March, and it was at the time of Trump's inauguration, and someone stood up to talk, and he was a local politician of some kind, of Hispanic background, and he was standing up against Trump, but he was also telling us the story about the American dream and how he was able to be where he was today because his mother had worked so hard that she held down 3 jobs, and that she'd worked this hard to get them the future that they have, and that they never even saw her. That's how hard she worked. And I thought, well, that's a bunch of rubbish right there, if I've ever heard it. Why on earth should we advocate for people to have to work so hard that their children never see them, and that this is a good thing? Before we even go into mental health and primary development. So it's like absolutely universal basic services. But if that mother had been able to just have the one job that supplemented and therefore raised her standard of living, she would also have been able to see her children, and he'd have been able to stand up there and talk about his mother's right to a life and to pursue her own happiness.
Absolutely. Yeah. Graeme, what would have been your, are there any sort of new things that have occurred to you during the course of this conversation? Anything else you'd like to contribute? Hello.
I thought it was a great discussion. And it was great to hear perspectives from, I'm working in a venue, Simeon as a lighting designer, Martina as an actor, all from sort of different places and different accents from all over.
Didn't we do well, Graeme, with our comprehensive method? Well done.
And noticing, a lot of the things that have been put up in the chat room are things that I didn't know about. So, universal social protection for peace, which was just popped up there. I know nothing about that. So after this, I'm going to want to kind of link to everything that's been posted up, I think.
Thank you. Simeon?
I think the main thing I kind of wanted to re-emphasize is how much kind of people's jobs and the stress people get from their jobs can affect their mental health. And even if it's a case of like not necessarily like I think there's lots of jobs that people would leave that they were in 6 months ago. And the things that stop them from leaving are probably many things, but money is the predominant one. And I think that I can only speak in terms of theatre, but I can, look back now and think about all the times when I've experienced a microaggression or something that was maybe only like minorly traumatic, not something that I would ever tweet about or talk to my mum about or anything like that, but just a little dig. And I think that people get enough of those eventually where they were like, if I did this, if I won the lottery, I would be out of here. None of these people would ever see my face again. And I think that people might not need to win the lottery, they might just not need to have the fear of not having that terrible job that they need to pay their bills, and how much that might free people from their kind of mental trauma and improve their mental health. And I think at the minute, there's this kind of weird thing where people will talk about the positives of the epidemic. And I wouldn't ever go too far as to say there were positives, but I think the fact that people having time off work, even when everything else is going on, can still create feelings of like relief or gratitude goes to show how crazy it was before, that was something where an epidemic would seem like there was a silver lining to it. I think it was so crazy that people didn't really realize before that happened. And I think that in this pause, maybe we have enough clarity in our minds about what we would be having to go back to actually think maybe there is something that does need to change drastically. And we need to have those conversations and the difficult questions and the difficult answers to actually work out what needs to happen next.
Thank you, Simeon. Yeah, now just on a personal note, I'm a mother, and for me, becoming a mother effectively meant I couldn't really pursue a career in the arts, because particularly in theatre, the arts and family life don't go hand in hand particularly. So what Martina was saying, sort of really touched me about the idea that it would be nice if some way arts could be part of our life rather than, this patronising term outreach that Sarah referred to. So it's just part of the fabric of everyday life and family and working, and that's all one big thing rather than these separate siloed activities. Sarah, would you like to say a few last words?
I was just thinking that, going back to the point that everybody has made, about everybody being an artist, not just artists or creatives being those things. So the titles are, need to be kind of looked at, but the whole thing needs to be valued fully by everybody. And I'm just thinking that, back in March when all this kind of kicked off, the thing that everybody turned to online were the arts. And everybody was doing the arts, and yet somehow now that everything's getting back up and running, it's been forgotten again. So things like this to kind of bring very much to the fore that the whole thing needs to be respected and everybody needs to play their part in that, I just think is extremely valuable.
Sure, thank you. Graeme, yes.
Just on that, and what Simeon was saying, I think if you look at the original definition and the etymology of culture is agricultural, and it simply means tilling of the earth for fertile growth. So if we then, if we take that on board coming out of this, then any investment in culture will automatically, be fertile.
Yeah.
So, and, I think, and culture is ordinary, as Raymond Williams famous, said, it's for all of us, and we all do it every day, and it's ploughing the fields.
Thank you. Toby, any last thoughts?
And that's a great analogy, Graeme, just that thing of like, yeah, actually, and I think what I think it was that Martina was saying earlier on about how lockdown did create this situation where a lot of people experienced free time, or unfortunately it was a very stressful experience for a lot of people, but that moment where you don't have to worry about going to work as much, or you can daydream a little bit more. And I think we need to, now that we've had that experience, we need to sort of hold on to it and allow more people to have more free time, or and when we say free time, it's not just time recovering from work or recovering from childcare. It should be time where you can actually be autonomous and do things and think about things, which you know, you're not able to do at the moment. And I think, like, yeah, we do have this situation. We've got this. I mean, I think the just to quote David Graeber, he said right at the start of the pandemic, you know, before the pandemic happened, we were basically stood on the railway tracks watching a train coming towards us and arguing about how fast it was coming towards us. COVID-19 has knocked us off the tracks, and we've got an opportunity not to get straight back onto the tracks and get hit by the train. And I think that's, you know, for me, that's that situation. We do have an opportunity to plow that cultural, you know, the fields and actually allow more people to engage in the arts, it not to be this elitist thing, and, you know, to change the way we run society. And I think, yeah, UBS should be the goal, you know, a thing where free housing, free healthcare, free education, even free food, you know, and I guess, you know, that I might sound like a communist, but I think and we should think about a post-work society, because, you know, if we've got all this ideas of robots taking all the menial labor and stuff like that, we will need to be more creative and do, you know, that's what humans do. That's what people have been saying all the way through this conversation. And I think that is really the bottom line, isn't it? Like, we all want to spend time and care with people. You know, like, actually all the shit jobs I've had before have been tolerable because of my colleagues. You know, that's the thing I think of. It's just like, yeah, it is, social interaction is the thing which makes life, what gets me out of bed in the morning. And that has been difficult during COVID. And thankfully, thank you for organizing this event, because it's given me an opportunity to be social with each other.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I mean, I think what Martina said about this could be a renaissance. We're coming out of the dark ages. Toby, you mentioned about people when they were young, dreaming about space and dinosaurs growing up. We all want to dream about space and dinosaurs. All of the stories, I think Bernadette mentioned, dignity, one or two who've said, I think the arts could and should be about all of this. And maybe we also need to think about the language we use. Is artist the right word? Maybe we should think of creative civil service. I don't know. But it's been a great discussion. I'd like to thank you all very much. Our panel, which is Graeme Farrow, Sarah Lee, Bernadette Russell, Martina Laird, Simeon Miller, and Toby Lloyd. If you're interested in finding out more about the work of Basic Income UK and the recently formed UBI Lab Arts, you can find both on Twitter and Facebook. Their links are posted there. So yeah, while UBI will go to all people, we will only strengthen our movement by highlighting the many different perspectives of who it will affect and how. Thank you all so very much for coming.